Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the College of Continuing and Professional Studies webinar, 3 Myths to Killing Your Agile Adoption. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Megan Fleming and I will be your moderator for today's webinar. If you have future questions about this webinar or other programs that we offer, please contact the Information Center. Contact information will be on the last slide of this presentation. There are some logistical items that I'd like to address before we begin. I ask that you please submit your questions throughout the webinar so we can address them during the Q&A portion at the end of this presentation. To submit your questions, select the Q&A button in the top right-hand corner and type your question and press send. You can see the Q&A button in the top right corner and the send button at the bottom. We will send an email in the next few days with a link to the recording of the webinar. The link will be sent to the email address that you submitted during registration. Many believe Agile approaches are a passing fad. If they wait for a bit, a new approach may be all the rage. It has now been over 20 years since Scrum was introduced, which is the most popular Agile method for project management. Not only isn't it a passing fad, it has moved into the mainstream, beyond software development applications. Organizations can no longer afford to avoid learning about Agile and what it could mean to the future of their business. Well-intentioned leaders need to do more than simply decree, "We're going Agile." Adopting a new way to do work will require more than changes to everyone's vocabulary. This webinar will provide you with insights and tips to avoid falling into common pitfalls that could impede your Agile adoption and get you back on track. In this session, we will explore the top 3 reasons Agile adoption struggles, what is meant by Agile, and which of the frameworks is right for your work, the importance of leadership to set the tone and strategic goal for adopting Agile, understanding the possible impact of making this kind of organizational change. Please join me in welcoming Rand Eaton.
Thank you. Let's see, I think you talked about that one. Let's jump to this one. Welcome everyone to the webinar. Thanks for taking some time out of a beautiful day to listen in to us. Hopefully this will be worth your time. So a little bit about me, why we're listening to me. I've been doing Agile exclusively since about 2006, 2007. And before that, I was working in what we now call traditional project management. So waterfall, project plans, all those sorts of things. And so when we talk about the things we're going to talk about, we're not, it's more comparing and contrasting. We're not saying one is better than the other. But the point of today is your Agile adoption itself and some things to watch out for. So I'm with Collaborative Leadership Team. We've been partnering with the College of Continuing and Professional Studies for several years now. I want to say it's at least 4 or 5. And we're part of the certificate program here. And that's super exciting because we get to watch students build toward an understanding of the certificate, and then at the end they get their certificate, which is my favorite part. I love to hand out that at the very last session when people are actually graduating. I'm from the Twin Cities. I've got a family here, lived here all my life. As we were chatting before the session, I did go to the U back in the day, so it's interesting to see how the campus has changed quite a bit, and it has. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. As said, if you have questions, please go ahead and submit them. If we get a lot of questions, we'll make time to get a lot of those questions answered. So let's talk about myth number 1. Agile is a passing fad. So Agile is not new at all, actually, and depending on how big an umbrella you make of the word Agile, it goes back quite a ways. So what we're seeing is it's actually gaining in popularity. It's not diminishing in popularity. If anything, the myth about another framework will come along is sort of it sort of disproves this myth, right? If there were more, or if it was diminishing, there'd be less frameworks being created than more, but they are increasing. So this all sort of stems back to a 1986 Harvard Business Review article. And I apologize to actual Japanese speakers. I am not a Japanese speaker, so when I talk about some of these Japanese names, I know I'm mangling them, and I apologize. But Takushi and Nanaka, they basically wrote about what they were doing at Toyota. And Toyota's experience dates back to right after the war with W. Edwards Deming. And in '86, the Harvard Business Review interviewed them about what they were doing at Toyota and why Toyota was being so successful. And in that article, they talk about teams working together in a rugby-like approach. And so when we say rugby-like, for those that aren't familiar with the game, we're talking about the actual game of rugby. And unlike American football or things, there are positions in rugby, but overall the team works together toward the goal of moving the ball across the finish line, right? There's offense and defense at the same time. So when the Harvard Business Review article talks about working in a rugby-like approach, that's the image that they're trying to paint. So a gentleman named Dr. Jeff Sutherland read that article in '86, and it sort of spoke to him in lots of ways and clarified some things that he'd been thinking about in his own work as a project manager, and also sort of touched back to some of his time in the military. And so he was inspired to take that and he formed a Scrum team in 1993. So if you want to sort of put a date on when Scrum is actually born, it would be 1993. In 1995, a gentleman named Kem Schwaber joined Dr. Sutherland to help teach Scrum and also expand it. So you're talking 93, 95, so it's fairly old. When we talk about the word Agile, though, Agile really comes into existence in February 2001. So some gentlemen met at a conference, ironically enough, here in the Twin Cities. It was a technical convention. And to properly paint this picture, we have to think back to the 2000s, right? This is the height of the PMI-style project plan. PMP certification is the certification to get. All projects are conducted in a very phase gate approach with very defined process and very defined deliverables. That's the background that this is all taking place in. So a big part of understanding Agile is understanding what it's a response to. And that's the image that we want to keep in mind. This is very much sort of the old throwing the hammer at the wall kind of a thing. Anyway, so these gentlemen got together and decided that they had seen some parallels in the way that they were working and figured it made sense to get together and talk about it some more. So in February 2001, they decided to meet in a ski resort in the mountains of Utah to sort of try to write some clarifying statements around these sorts of things. Unfortunately, they were all gentlemen. Everybody claims that women were meant to be invited, but no one seems to remember the names or can find an email that was actually sent. Tisk, tisk, guys. But these gentlemen got together and decided to come to some sort of alignment on how they were working. What they ended up with was what we'll see in a second, a manifesto. Agile as a word, though, actually comes from the book that you're seeing on the screen here. One of the gentlemen was reading a book at the time called Agile Competitors and Virtual Organizations. Now, most of the folks that were there were in the software development industry. So they were concerned that if they just came out with some technical terms, the business, air quotes, business side of things wouldn't consider that as anything more than just sort of a new technical approach. And so they wanted to come up with a different word. And they all like this idea of being agile. Unfortunately, now, almost to a man, they will say if they had a choice, they would have named it something different because, as we all know from English, agile is an adjective. Right? It's not a noun. And so this concept, as was highlighted, of going agile or doing agile doesn't really work because of that fact. And so most of these folks now felt that would have been better served calling it something else other than agile. But agile is what we're stuck with. So the point, though, is they wanted to benefit the entire organization. So just because these gentlemen were software development professionals, they understood that the whole company needed to be involved, not just the technical folks. So the ideas that they came up with over the next 3 days were written down, and they became what was known as the Agile Manifesto. So if you're interested in referring to this later, agilemanifesto.org is the site that this has been at and has been for many, many years. And it looks like this. So basically, the highlighted portion here is something we'll get to in a second, but what they discovered was we're uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others do it. So other interesting thing, you can cross out the word software and put product. You can cross out the word software and put service, and it still works. So again, they were all software folks, and that was the perspective they were bringing to the meeting. But since then, other people have started to use this framework for a variety of things having nothing to do with even technology. We have clients that use this to create products or services. We have clients that, in one case, they use it to build a culture for their organization. We have a lot of marketing folks that do it. There's hardware. We know of a company that's used basically off-the-shelf Scrum to build cars, street legal cars that you can actually buy and drive and things. So don't get hung up on software there, and that's an important point. Is the goal of this was to bring to the entire organization. So when you're doing your adoption, don't let, as we'll get to in a minute, don't let it be pigeonholed as just a technology thing or just a software thing. So we'll come back to that. The manifesto writers or signers, I guess, came up with some four basically principles that are going to guide our approach to this. Now, the important thing to remember is these are like sliders. So we can be at different places on a curve between individuals and interactions over processes and tools. So like I mentioned earlier, this whole thing was a response to the way that projects are being managed and run. So very process heavy, very focused on tools, right? What's your Microsoft project implementation that you're doing? And what the point they were trying to make here is they would rather prefer to work with individuals and focus on the interactions and let the process and tools support those. So as you can see, there's value in the things that are on the right side of the screen, but the manifesto is urging us to value the things on the left more. Okay? So again, working software or working product over comprehensive documentation. One of the ironies of the PMP model is most of the artifacts are documentary in nature, and so you can complete all these documents correctly, but still not have anything workable at the end of your project, which those of us that actually want to get something out of the project would say, well, where's what I asked for? So the manifesto framers are saying, let's put working software or working product or working something in front of the hands of people right away, and they can react to that as opposed to trying to read a document and respond to a document. Hand in hand with that, we want to value customer collaboration over contract negotiation. The early days of project management were very much about creating a contract and then creating a process to see how well we did on delivering that contract. Again, very important if you're in sort of very high risk, high security things where that doesn't go away. At the same time, though, we want to make sure that the customer is still being frequently collaborated with or frequently asked about, are we actually solving your problem, right? Those of us that have been on big software projects will all remember very vividly, we'll get to the end of a long project and you put whatever it was you built in front of the client and they say, well, that's not what I asked for. And so it's really deflating at that point. And finally, responding to change over following a plan. Here's where we insert the famous Eisenhower quote, plans are valuable, planning is useless. So we want to create a structure where we can respond to change. Now the important part about this is we're not actually going to do it. So we will do planning, we will have some sort of plan. The difference we're trying to highlight here is unlike, again, a traditional project plan, and believe me, I've written many project plans, and I have very fond memories of some of them. we want to make sure that we're not letting the plan tell us what to do next at the expense of making a better decision. So, as everyone's well aware, there's a lot of road construction going on. So if I'm going to go on my normal commute and I'm going to follow my planned commute, to the letter, and I discover one of my roads are closed, well, how is that going to affect my ability to get to where I'm going on time? Right? That's really what we're talking about. We're still planning to get to the same place. I still needed to get to the U so we can have the webinar today, but I wasn't able to follow my previously scheduled route that I would have done due to that construction. So that's the point here, and this, I think, particularly is one that people tend to get wrapped around the axle around in terms of, well, if we have no plan, how do we know where we're going? We do have a plan, we do have a destination, we're just a little more flexible in how we get there. Okay? That's the manifesto. Again, it's at agilemanifesto.org, so if you'd like to go back and refer to this. I've seen people just print this out and put it on their wall somewhere so they have it to kind of look at. In my work as an Agile coach, I often will use this just to say, okay, are we talking a little bit more about individual interactions, or are we letting the tool take place of the humans talking? Very valuable. One more here. So then they came up, in addition to that, with some practices. And I'm not going to read all these things because it's sort of a wall of text for those out there, but the important one that highlights the intent is item number 4 there. Business people and developers must work together daily throughout the project. You're going to have to take my word for it, but that's the only must in that entire wall of text. So they probably felt that was pretty important. And this is where we get into that sort of, it's a construct of, business and technology, or business and IT. And, over the years, that gulf has gotten wider and wider to the degree that, some organizations have actually built whole buildings, and we're going to put the IT folks in one building and the business people in another building. So when we talk about working together, that's really the intent of the manifesto folks. And one of the myths that we'll come back to later is this is just for IT. And as you can see at the top of the slide there, no, it's about us. So the U of M, if we're doing an Agile adoption, we need to have the whole U doing the Agile adoption. It's not just up to the business to do this, or not just up to technology. Because at the end of the day, the paycheck comes from the same company. Okay? So these are just some practices. And these are things that the framers found in alignment with what they were working. And again, they are sort of software specific just because of the folks in the room. But again, as you said, or as I said earlier, you can cross out software, input service or a product, and it still works pretty well. And so just as an example, our highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable services or valuable product, right? The faster we get something into the hands of the person that's wanting it, the sooner we can decide if we've solved their problem or not. So when we talk about Agile, that's the concept. We want to get things happening. And in fact, one of the reasons that organizations are interested in adopting Agile is that speed and ability to manage different changes. So again, I won't go through all 12 of these. I'll just highlight my favorite, number 10, simplicity, the art of maximizing the amount of work not done is essential. So if there's no need to do something, let's not do it. Now, guys, don't try this at home because it's not going to get you out of your honey-do list. Believe me, I've tried over the years, but so it's not going to be your go. In other words, go golfing this weekend. So, all right. Now, the thing to be careful about is this idea of Agile in name only. So as we've discovered, in order to be Agile, because again, Agile is an adjective, the organization has to put the values and principles into action. So if you take what you're doing as an organization and just rename everything to Agile language without any change, you're not actually putting the values and principles into action. You're just taking the language. Okay? Now, there's no one Agile framework. It's just an umbrella term. It's like pizza or pasta or rock and roll. It covers a variety of the frameworks that are out there, as long as they adhere to those values and principles. Scrum does, extreme programming does, just as an example. So there's no such thing as the Agile methodology as well. Remember, it's intended to be flexible so that it applies to a broad range of services and businesses without deliberately saying you're going to run your business like this. Okay? Now, methodologies by their very nature, they're prescriptive. Do it like this. And again, there's nothing wrong with methodologies per se. If I'm learning piano, for instance, there's several directed approaches to learning piano. First, we're going to learn about notes, and then we're going to learn about structure, and then we're going to learn about keys. That's great. That's when we're trying to learn a very defined thing. But organizations, by virtue of their nature, are much more fluid and much more like organisms than individuals. And so if we have a very prescriptive methodology or framework, we're going to run into some challenge in terms of how do we fit the framework when it doesn't fit our organization. So as was mentioned, leadership that is intending to take their companies in this direction, they have to understand those values and principles and the fact that this is going to be a fairly major change for your organization, even if you don't successfully complete it. And we'll get to that in a minute. So again, just be careful about kind of finding that perfect answer. There is no perfect answer. Otherwise, in the 20 years that we've been talking about this, everybody would have adopted that. And so like I mentioned in my opening remarks, since we're still seeing other frameworks being created, that says to me that no one's nailed it, right? We're still evolving and we're still learning these things. So if you're actually looking, and we're speaking to the leaders here now, so if you're actually looking to make these changes, be sure you can demonstrate credibility by being able to talk about the values and principles and how they relate to what you're trying to do. So for example, Principle 8 talks about sustainable pace. And so one of the things that those of us that have been in software a while will sort of laugh about and then kind of cross their fingers and hope we never do one again is this idea of death marches. So mandatory nights and weekends, we got a deadline coming, all hands on deck, etc. Sustainable pace means that we want to get away from that because death marches have a cost. We're going to burn up our people, we're going to burn up our infrastructure to meet this deadline. And so the manifesto says, well, let's step back a little bit and make sure that the way that we're working makes sense for the people. And again, Principle 11, we're talking about self-organizing teams. So instead of having a role or a title with a singular activity, project manager, analyst, architect, the manifesto is pushing us in the direction of a group of people that will self-organize to deliver the work as needed. Again, this is back to that rugby-like approach. Yes, there are roles in rugby, there are positions in rugby, but at the end of the day, it's all about getting the ball over the finish line. So when we're talking about self-organizing teams, that's again that picture to keep in mind. Yes, you can still have an analyst role or an analyst or architect title, but just be prepared to occasionally do things that are outside of that title toward that goal of getting to done. And then finally, the one we mentioned before, principle number 4, we're all on the same team. So again, unlike American football where we have offense and defense, rugby tends to be, a one-sided game. And so get your business people and your developers working together regularly. Maybe daily doesn't happen right off the bat. That's great. But, instead of never, maybe let's try once a month. And then maybe let's try every 2 weeks. And then maybe let's try once a week. The odd thing you'll discover is once we get past some communications hurdles, in other words, business people learning how to speak to the technology or the service deliverers, and then the developers and service deliverers learning how to speak business, you'll find they actually sort of like working together, and they'll start to do it more often than not. But initially, if we have those silos, we're going to have to be really careful about how those silos get maintained or not maintained. Doing good? Good. All right. Agile is an IT thing, not a business thing. So again, this kind of goes back to the past, and when we talk about a company, it's odd. It's only sort of really in the Agile space that we talk about business versus technology. If you go to the marketing areas of organizations, they don't really say business versus marketing. They say, it's just the company. So if your organization is in one of these places where there's this gulf or dividing wall between, for lack of a better term, the nerds and the suits, you're going to want to come up with some ways to talk past that. And so, like we mentioned, because the intent of this was to bring this solution to the entire organization, we want to really start breaking down that wall between the business and the IT. Now, it's about how quickly the entire organization can respond to changing market conditions. So if it was just an IT thing, being agile, your technology would be very responsive, but your business might still be stuck in their quarterly plans, their yearly forecasts, their 5-year plans, and they're not going to be able to take advantage of all that capability that you're actually building. So it needs to be a 360-degree response. Same thing, if the business is very keyed into the market, they're very interested in keeping the pulse on the situation, but technology is very slow to respond, that's going to be just as bad. And in fact, one of the challenges of adopting this stuff is simply the architecture of your business. If you've architected your systems such that they don't change rapidly or that they're cumbersome to change, that's going to be something you're going to want to look at quickly because, as we mentioned, it does no good if sales comes back and says, hey, I signed this really big deal and all we got to do is these 10 things, and IT says, great, we'll get to that from a year from Tuesday. That's not going to really work together. And again, the point is to satisfy the customer. That's the number one practice is satisfying the customer. So that's the goal. The goal isn't to get better at business or to get better at technology. It's to satisfy the customer. And again, I hate to break this to my IT friends, but we wouldn't exist without the business. So we need them. They're part of this equation. And we're there to deliver solutions that enable the business. And so, as I always tell IT folks, if you're not getting business engagement, if your business partners are doing things that don't involve you, I would be a little interested in what they're doing that isn't involving your team. Non-IT business spending has been increased by anywhere from 8 to 15% over year. So we got to stay in that game if we want to be part of the game. So let's talk about business versus, right? It's not an us versus them. It's a we thing. So the first thing to do is usually just start educating everyone, right? And let's talk to our business partners about why the organization is making this change. The worst thing not the worst thing, one of the worst things you can do is IT to just adopt an agile approach and then say to the business, hey, we're going to do this agile thing now, and here's what we're going to need from you from now on. The example I like to say to this is, if I go into my doctor and my doctor says, hey, I found this really great new way of treating this, and you're going to be the first person I try this out on, I'm going to maybe find a different doctor. Same thing for the business, right? If they're feeling like this is a guinea pig, they're being used as a guinea pig to figure out how this works, that's going to cause some reluctance or some tension. Okay? So make sure they understand the why, and we'll come back to the why for sure. Our experience, though, has been once business becomes aware of the manifesto and what the goals of the manifesto are and how Scrum or any of the other frameworks will help them with that, it really makes a lot of sense. Business people have a higher tolerance for ambiguity than some technology folks. And so as we sort of make aware the increased ability to change to some of that ambiguity, they're very interested. So again, make sure that you have the discussion first and then offer some education. And it may not be the full-blown class that you need everyone else to go to, but at the same point, they need to be at least consulted. And so, as you've heard, I've been trying to be careful about using words like the business or IT or them or they. We really want to start to break down the finger pointing and the lack of accountability as it relates to ourselves. So just saying, business doesn't understand or IT doesn't understand, that's just pushing us farther apart, right? So again, let's use that very inclusive language. What are the goals that we really are trying to do? And so an important part of this, again, as it relates back to leaders, is leaders need to make sure that everyone in the organization is clear about the business goals. So what are our high-level yearly goals or quarterly goals or things? Your business folks probably are very aware of those. Your technology folks probably aren't. Do your developers or do your service providers understand what business goals mean as it relates to them? That's going to help them make better decisions and make them part of the solution in terms of, well, if we did this, maybe we'd save some of that dollar or we'd move faster to this goal. So again, inclusive language is very important to any sort of adoption. And again, the myth we're busting here is Agile is just for IT. As I mentioned, we have several clients that I would say are not technical in nature. There would be more business in nature if we're painting with that brush. And they use many of the Agile frameworks just fine. As I mentioned, marketing is an area that Scrum in particular is really taking off on. And we're talking about the traditional marketing, right? So collateral and ad buys and things like that. They're very much embracing Scrum fairly out of the box. And so you would say pretty conclusively that's not a technology space at all. So again, we're all in the same boat. We want to make sure that the oars are all moving in the same direction, and that's going to get us to where we need to go sooner. So Stephen Denning has written several books about Agile, and he writes primarily for Forbes, which is again a business publication, and he's been a big champion, of helping them understand how this can benefit them. So his new book is called Age of Agile. And here's a quote. So again, the point of an Agile organization is connection. We want to create that instant, frictionless value. And the only way that works is if we all understand we're working toward the same thing. Okay? So if you're interested in Stephen Denning, he's going to be coming to town later this month. There's information out there. You can check our website about it. But we just wanted to highlight he's coming. Myth number 3. Going Agile will deliver faster. My favorite. So somehow agility gets conflated with speed. And sometimes that's the case and sometimes it's not, right? If you're wanting to go just as fast as you possibly can, you're probably not talking about much ability to maneuver, right? So when the rocket is taking off, it's going in a straight line straight up. That's not Agile per se. So what we're talking about here is start being Agile. And a big part of that is this question of why, right? Why are we needing to go Agile? And if leadership just says to go faster or deliver quicker, that's great, but faster than what, right? Many organizations don't have a good understanding of what their capability actually is. Maybe they're going as fast as they possibly can. An even better one would be, do your customers actually want you to go faster? We've seen several instances where people have done Agile adoptions and the customers have actually complained that now we're delivering too quickly. So the example that I'm thinking of, the team started to deliver on a monthly cadence and the customer said, no, that's too expensive for us to constantly retrain. We'll take a release every 6 months. Well, that's good because A, we're delivering to the customer's satisfaction, but then B, that gives us more time to make sure that what we actually deliver to the customer in 6 months has been tested, validated, all those things, right? So make sure you need some sort of measurable goal. And, again, for leaders, be able to answer this question. For staff or people on the teams that are being asked to do these sorts of things, get good at asking the why question, right? What are we doing? What can't we do now that an Agile framework will enable? And again, there's no mystic Agile metric, but we should have some sort of measurable goal. So some examples, deliver in 8 months or less. One of the most famous Agile adoptions was the Salesforce adoption from a few years ago. At the time they started that adoption, they were delivering on an 18-month or so cadence, if memory serves. And in the course of that Agile adoption, they got that down to well under a quarter. They delivered once a quarter. So quite a substantial increase in ability to deliver. But that was a goal that they had. They wanted to move that down. Another good one would be increase revenue by 20% over the last one with the product release. Another one would be some sort of quality metric. We want to reduce defects by a certain thing. The point is we want to make sure that we have some sort of thing we can track, right? So tangible, deliverable, actionable goals. Now, even worse than that is to just announce we're going Agile and we're going to do it by some date. Because again, going Agile is that a destination? Is that like somewhere over the Canadian border? I don't know where that actually is. But so to mandate when we're going to be Agile, again, without some sort of metric that we can track how we're doing, you know, it's not really fair. So Agile is not a destination, and yes, you know, there's the old quote, it's not the journey, it's the destination. But in this case, it really is applicable, right? It's a mindset that we want to adopt because it's a different way of doing work. So a big part of all this is continuous improvement. So just being able to say, okay, that's it, we hit it, we've achieved agility, that kind of harkens back to the Agile in name only. So again, leadership has to be educated on what the change means. And leaders should be able to answer that question of why. Well, currently we can't deliver in the time frame that our biggest customer wants, and we feel that adopting a framework will give us better data on making that happen, right? So the goal has to be measurable, has to be definable. And please, instead of doing overall changes and saying the entire organization, try some pilots or some initiatives. Because part of what you need to figure out is how well Agile is going to land in your organization. If you've got very rigid procedures, very rigid policies, you're going to have to look at flexibility in those before you really adopt some of these sorts of things. So you have to understand the risks. So we are all for leadership being excited and people being excited to embrace this change. Others are not going to embrace this change. They're going to actively resist it. And so part of the role of leading an Agile adoption is having the ability to deal with both. You are probably going to lose some people when you make this change, right? The people that don't want to kind of play, they're going to find something else to do. The people that are really, really excited might get frustrated that we're not going fast enough, and they'll go find a place that they can go as fast as they want. So understanding that this is a change that's going to affect your staff, it's going to affect your capability to deliver in the short run. So you need to make sure we're measuring the right thing. All right, I think we've saved 20 minutes for questions. How are we doing on? Oh. Okay. So if you haven't had questions up to this point, we'll take a second and let you kind of gather your thoughts. I will. Yeah, oh, yeah, there's a Q&A. Let's see, let me go back. As I mentioned, we teach through the College of Continuing and Professional Studies, and one thing that's been nice is the number of leaders that come through that program. And so, you know, again, part of that education, if you're interested in this as a team, and the way that this often goes, frankly, is someone at the team level will get excited about Agile, or they've done it at a previous company, or things like that, and so they're really excited to get going, and they may find a group of like-minded people, and then at some point leadership sort of gets wind of this. Now you need to make sure that, again, we have that goal. What are we trying to do? But you know, be aware at the team level, this is a fairly major undertaking, and so to just sort of say, well, we should do this because we should do this. You know, we need to start learning about business cases. We need to start learning about ROI. We need to start being, again, able to speak in language that our business friends are able to understand, because they're they're the ones we're going to want to get a lot of good data from. And if they're not willing to come along on that journey, that's going to really impede how fast we can actually do the adoption. Question? Okay, any questions from? Look, yeah, I'm looking around the room here too, just to see if we can. I wonder if we can go back easily. Let's go back to this for a second. So again, that aspect of agile leadership is a really important one, and we want to make the distinction too that this isn't something that just the teams are doing. We've run into organizations that have been very interested in agile and very passionate about it as long as somebody else is doing it. And so, for leaders out there, the thing to remember is you can do this as well. In fact, there's a lot of value to organize your executive levels as an agile team, because that is going to show the entire organization this is something that everybody can do, but two, then you'll also harness that fast feedback and that ability to do the continuous improvement that your staff is going to enjoy. So an early kind of adoption tip, I guess, would be take a look at the way that your leaders are working together and see if there's things to be learned from any of the approaches there, and not just sort of wait for the teams to do this. There's always a strange point in an agile adoption where you have teams working in a very sort of interactive agile approach, and you have planning being done at higher levels in that traditional sort of yearly or financial model budgeting kind of thing. And that's just something you need to sort of work through. And so as an agile leader, being able to say, well, I understand that we're sort of in this in-between place. How do we start to move the needle a little bit there? And honestly, getting your finance people involved, getting your business leaders involved is a big part of that. Because if we're, say, for instance, funding our projects at a quarterly level or a yearly level, our ability to really adopt some of these things is going to be limited by how fast that occurs. So get everybody involved. For the teams, as I mentioned, be sure that you're willing to understand that some of the things that you're saying, we might need to choose different words. Business people, for better or worse, talk one way. Sometimes technology people, for better or worse, talk another way. Let's improve our communication. How do we use that inclusive language? How do we figure out some better stuff? Okay, I'm seeing we have some questions.
We do, yes. Okay. So we're going to start with the first question. How would you suggest talking with finance people on how to fund teams versus funding projects?
That's a great question, and I think I started answering that one. There's a lot of interesting work being done in terms of financing, and the example that I like is something that's close to an option. So the financial instrument, an option, basically gives us the ability to buy stock at a certain price. And one way that you can start to change your budgeting is to work in a similar fashion. So because we have our definable goal, we can allocate a certain amount of funds toward that goal. And as we see progress toward the goal, then we can allocate a little bit more, we can allocate a little bit more. From your CFO's perspective, that money is still gone, right? It's still a sunk cost that we can put. It's just if the team doesn't meet the goal, we don't actually give them the money. Now, the thing that changes there is we need sort of more real-time reporting than we're used to, perhaps. But it's sort of, again, outside the scope of this, but there's a lot of interesting funding being done on Agile projects, and the way you phrase the question is sort of the answer. We want to start to fund products or teams versus funding projects.
Okay, so then the next question is, how do you find the balance between guided slash coached transformation versus grassroots once Agile is catching on?
Yeah, it's a fair question. And for our company, collaborative leadership team, we tend to take um, the stance that we feel coaching is more like a personal trainer. And so, you go to the gym to achieve a specific goal, right? I want to increase my bench. I want to lose 25 pounds. And, the personal trainer will help you craft a plan toward that goal. Uh, the other side of that is the coach that's just sort of around, and is there to answer questions and things. And if we're not careful, that style of coaching can actually become a crutch. If I'm constantly running back to my expert to answer this question, now we're into the teach to fish, give a fish kind of space. And so the balance, I think, is one that you want to find um, that point where the teams are a little bit uncomfortable, and then start to have them figure out what they would do, and then go ask the coach. And hopefully that made sense. But the goal would be to make an intentional decision, and then have the coach explain to them what they could have done differently or could have done better. That will sort of get away from the constant going to ask someone what I should do.
Great. Another question: how do you do ROI on Agile teams?
Return on investment for agile teams. Yeah, we'd want a little more clarity around the question, but essentially the team should be marching towards some measurable goal. And that's increase revenue, that's get a certain volume of sales, something like that. And so the return on investment is really going to be driven by what that metric is. The good news there is, again, as we start to reach out to our business partners and finance people, they probably have pretty strong opinions about what ROI looks like. At the grassroots level, you can simply add up what the team is going to cost from sprint to sprint or from iteration, and that's basically the amount of value they should be delivering or better.
Have you seen Agile mindset slash methodology implemented on a business project that did not involve software development or a technology aspect? Any examples?
Yeah, we see it all the time, and I mentioned several marketing teams. We've seen a lot of that where the whole process of preparing a campaign, the whole process of getting the collateral is all done in an agile framework. As I mentioned, there's a company here locally that is doing a startup inside of their company, and they actually use Scrum to create the culture. So they would use Scrum to define the vacation policy. They would use Scrum to define what sort of person they wanted to hire, what those hiring practices were. Had nothing at all to do with technology, for instance.
What recommendations do you have for a company where a department has adopted being Agile faster than leadership?
That's very common, actually. And so all I would suggest is make sure that that team is being very vocal about what value that they're actually bringing. So you want to start to invite leaders, and you want to invite those business folks. And so if we're using Scrum, for instance, make sure that we're inviting business folks to the product review. Now, they may not attend, but one trick that I've seen work really well is you record the product review, either video or audio, and then you send that out. So people may not attend real time, but they can get the data from the meeting. And as they start to understand the value that's generated by that team, they'll start to increase their ability to attend. So again, it all starts with communication, and just sort of be aware that you're probably going to be out ahead of leadership ahead of time, but by consistently delivering value, consistently delivering trust, that's going to start to bridge that gap.
Great. Do you have suggested methods for introducing Agile to various departments or groups in a company? As a business analysis, this person specifically does short presentations for each new group and is just wondering how they can include their entire network into the transition.
Yeah, that's sort of culture specific. I mean, some organizations do brown bags, some organizations do all team meetings. I mean, whatever communication you're using now, I would just add this to it. If we are sort of moving forward in that spirit of this is for everyone, um, again, your leaders are going to be very open to using those existing company meetings or those existing business meetings to start to talk about this approach. To to the point of the short presentations, I mean, absolutely, those work great. And in fact, if you're starting a new agile team, you're probably going to want to sit all the people down that are they're even peripherally involved with that team and give them a short presentation for this. And all I can say there is, food goes a long, long way. So if you're going to have one of these sessions, by all means, buy lunch, buy donuts, buy coffee. You'd be surprised how much more people will show up when there's food on the table.
Great. Do you know of any nonprofits that have adopted Agile successfully?
Yeah, quite a few. And now that I've said that, my mind just went blank. But nonprofits are an absolutely a space that uses this because, again, a nonprofit, you're dealing with sort of the ability to motivate people without offering to pay them more. And so that sort of inherent value or making progress toward a goal goes very well hand in hand with that progress toward a specific um, goal. I know that I'm trying to think of, now that I've said that, a specific nonprofit. Maybe we can find some by the time we send out the link, just to answer the question. But I do know there are ones around town that are doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, and then folks, feel free to keep. We've got about like 7 minutes left. I've got one more question. How do you define product in Agile terms?
Product in agile terms. Well, it's kind of whatever you're doing. So, we can look at traditional product development. In other words, making a new product from scratch. We could define product as, this webinar, for instance. That might be considered a product. Services. I mean, Co-Lead Team is a services company, and we use Scrum internally to manage how we deliver things. And we just define everything we do as a product, even though it's in many cases an actual service or a class or something like that. So, how you define product, I think, relates back to, again, what's that goal, what's that why, what's the problem you're trying to solve. Having said that, I think defining your product is an interesting conversation that needs to happen before your team will really hit its stride. Because it's really easy to kind of look at the products that you have right now and then struggle to see how one team would deliver on all those. And so maybe my advice on that question is just be prepared for it to take a little longer than you think it might. And then once you might do some trial and error on how that's defined.
Okay, so it looks like we've got one more question, and this will be the last one that we take. Thank you all for submitting questions. Can you talk about the roles of BAs and QAs on Agile teams?
Sure. That's an example, as we mentioned before, of there's nothing wrong with having a title or a role. And a self-organizing team will absolutely need people with that skill set. Depending on the framework that you're talking about, some of them have different titles for those sorts of activities. Scrum, for instance, doesn't specifically define BAs or QAs or those folks. They just call it the team. And again, it's not to say that those things aren't valuable, and we absolutely want to have that skill set. We don't want to lock a team into saying, I need so many BAs and so many QAs and so many developers. To give you the flexibility to say, what you feel like you need on a team. So again, the role, I think there's absolutely no difference in terms of what the role does. There are some differences in timing. There are some differences in the sequencing of the activities, and that's probably outside this, but that might be a good segue into our upcoming class here that we talk about. We do go into some of those things more involved in the College of the College of Continuing and Professional Services Studies classes. We've got another Agile Fundamentals coming up. Agile Testing is in October. That pretty much talks exclusively about Agile and QA. Teams and Metrics is coming up in November. And then I believe after that we do have an Agile Requirements course that does specifically talk about the Agile approach of gathering requirements.
Absolutely, great. So yes, like Rand mentioned, you can definitely give us a call. Our phone number is listed there. Go on our website if you are interested in taking some of these upcoming courses. And as I mentioned earlier, we will be sending a link to the webinar recording in a couple of days, so you will be able to listen back in on this webinar. There are a few relevant courses, like we mentioned, listed on the slide, and you can visit our website at ccaps.umn.edu. That has our full list of classes and educational programs. Thank you so much for joining us today, and have a wonderful afternoon.